Hello and welcome to my channel. So in this video we're going to be making this stylized fiery tornado kind of thing. However, you can use the methods and techniques used in this tutorial to make your own stuff. So the main concept behind this effect is that we have a curve, and if we go to the curve data properties and in the geometry section go to the bevel and in object pick this shape, but it can't be added into the bevel of this curve line because it's a mesh and we need to convert it into a curve. Now after conversion it gets selected as the bevel of this curve line. And the next step is that we're gonna add a simple deform modifier and twist the curve geometry by 360 degrees. And of course you can change the shape of the bevel or use different shaped objects and so on. We're gonna do something similar, but it will be in geometry nodes.
So let's start by deleting the camera and lights for now. And no, we're not going to delete the default cube. Let's add a cylinder and lower the vertices to 16 and change the cap fill type to nothing. Now we need a solidify modifier to add some thickness to the cylinder. Select the default cube and go to the geometry nodes and add a new geometry node network. And then drag this cylinder from here into the geometry node network and add a curved line. Add a mesh to curve node and connect it to the cylinder, and also add a curve to mesh node. Connect the curve line to the curve input of this node and the other mesh to curve node to the profile curve. Increase the Z value to 2 meters. Now add a mesh to volume node, increase the density to 10 for now. We're going to change these values later. Now add a volume into mesh node. And add a set position node after this and plug a noise texture into the offset value. This is going to displace the position of the mesh according to the noise texture. I've added a map range to manipulate the effect. Also, the noise texture is too strong, so lower the value to about 1 or maybe lower than that. I'll have to add some additional modifiers because I can't make all of this in the geometry nodes for now. So we're gonna need a simple deform modifier and twist the mesh on z-axis by 360 degrees. Also, we need a lattice modifier. So add a lattice and cover all the mesh of this tornado. Now subdivide this lattice on the width to add more control points. Now select the mesh again and go to the modifiers tab and choose this lattice as the lattice object in the modifier. Now you can select the lattice, and in the edit mode you can grab these points and move to make a shape. Now add a set material node and choose the material. We're going to look into the materials later. For now, let's just add this purple shader here. The threshold level needs to be increased to about 2. Now duplicate these 5 nodes to the top side. Join these two with the joint geometry node and connect this curve line to this upper curve to mesh node. Now add a cylinder and connect this to the profile curve just like the previous cylinder. There's an error in the curve to mesh node because we have plugged the mesh into where a curve input was needed. So first we're going to need to convert this cylinder, which is the mesh, into a curve by a mesh to curve node. Now this mesh isn't going to show up because probably there is no volume or any other reasons, I don't know. In the cylinder we need to change this fill type to triangles, or you can also add a triangulate node. Also add the same noise texture setup into the set position of this node tree. You can use any texture. I'm going to use a gradient node tree here, gradient texture node here. This is the inner part of the tornado. I'm going to scale it down so that it doesn't overlap with the outer part. Add a set shade smooth node after the joint geometry node. Now we need an effect when the geometry is created. For that, we're gonna add a delete geometry node We're actually gonna reverse the geometry deletion effect, so connect a Voronoi texture into the selection input of the delete geometry node. Now add a map range in between and the form min can be used to keyframe the animation. Now add a trim curve node from curve operations and add it after the curve line at the start of the node tree. Now this end value of the trim curve node can be used to animate the inner core of this tornado. I'm gonna keyframe the inner part up to the 50 frames. And the outer covering from 50 frames to 100 frames.
One more thing we need to do is that add a geometry transforms node at the end, and using this node we can rotate the mesh on the z coordinates by using these rotation coordinates, using the same I command to add keyframe and then rotate on z coordinates and then add another keyframe at frame number 100. Now we need another geometry node network. So add a cube and create a new geometry node. Add the same modifiers, the simple deform modifier with twist on z-axis and a lattice modifier. Add a mesh cylinder, change the cap fill type to none, vertices to 8 and the radius to 20. Now add a scale elements node, a noise texture and a gradient texture. Change the gradient type to radial and plug it into the scale input of the scale elements node and the vector input of the noise texture. Plug the noise texture into the offset value of the set position node. Well, this setup actually displaces the vertices of this mesh cylinder according to the texture. Now we're going to use these vertices, the vertices of this mesh, as the points on which we display our instances. Now we need an instance on points node and an icosphere. Plug the icosphere into the instance input of the instance on points node. Lower the radius to 0.3, subdivisions to 2. We need a geometry transforms node before the scale elements. Now add a scale instance node, another set position and a set material node. Plug the factor output of the noise texture into the scale of the scale instance node. Add a Voronoi texture, change into Manhattan and plug the distance output into the offset value of the set position node. Now duplicate all these nodes to one side. In the mesh cylinder of the second node tree, we can change the vertices to 12, side segments to 5 and the radius to 10. Change the radius of the icosphere to 0.05 meter. Now add a realize instance node at the end of this node tree. Now this realize instance node is the reason that these instance objects are looking like this. The difference is that with realize instance node, the instance objects are regarded as independent separate objects, and therefore these modifiers can work on them, and the result is these rod-shaped looking objects. Add a joint geometry node at the end and a shade smooth node after this. Now add a delete geometry node on both of these node trees, add a Voronoi texture and a map range, and connect the Voronoi texture to the selection of both delete geometry node. Now, like the previous mesh, we can use this from min value of the map range to keyframe the animation. Now let's finally look at the materials. For the particles, I have a simple material having an emission shader with high emission strength. for the core, it's a material with an emission shader and a glass shader and a mix shader. In the factor input of the mix shader, it's a facing output from the layer weight added with the color ramp. Now finally the material of the main body. We have an emission, a transparent shader and a mix shader. We need a noise texture, a mapping, and a texture coordinates. Add a color ramp into it and plug it into the factor of the mix shader. Now add a glossy BSTF, another mix shader, a Fresnel node with a color ramp. Plug the Fresnel into the factor, glossy BSTF into the upper input and the other into the remaining lower input. We can put a value node to the location input of this mapping node and add a driver for the animation.